It's the Music Stupid number 14. This is Mazzy. You know what led me here today to this one? These are going to be moody, ethereal, kumbaya-esque records that you can play at a late night romantic dinner, during a massage, during lovemaking in some cases. I don't know why I'm laughing at that. It's just beautiful, ethereal music depending on your point of view. Now, two records led me there. I already showed this in my last video. This is not one of them, but I already talked about the issue finally on vinyl for the masses. That's Asian influenced electronic, reverb, bouncing, repetitive guitar, just like when you drop your guitar neck on the twin reverb with all the reverb up, you hear that recycling of the reverb echoing and keyboards and that great low voice. So watch that video. This was my favorite album of the last quarter century. That's a lot to say. That doesn't count in this video, but that got me thinking, because last night when that arrived, or a couple days ago when that arrived, I also got this album. This is the Jimmy Giuffre 3. Now, I got turned on to this. If you haven't seen it, go back and look at my conversation with Joe Harley, tone poet Joe Harley, Blue Note tone Harley. What an amazing gentleman and musicologist, music lover. And I asked him some records that he liked, records he didn't work on. And this is one of them, and I ordered it. Oh my God, it's so beautiful. But it fits in with this music. Recorded in 1961, ECM, Manfred Eicher's label, ECM out of Germany, got the tapes and loved this record so much, like Joe Harley, and released it in this 2-record set in 1991. And the original recordings were the 2 albums, I guess, that Jimmy Giuffre 3 actually recorded in 1961, produced by Creed Taylor, who worked with Verve. This is originally recorded for Verve. 2 albums in 1961. And Creed Taylor would obviously go on to start CTI Records, his own label. This is Jimmy Giuffre, Paul Bley, and Steve Swallow. Of course, the last 2 would be on a lot of ECM records in subsequent years, obviously into the 70s and beyond. So piano, double bass, and clarinet. Clarinet. You don't think of, oh, jazz, clarinet. You think of Benny Goodman, that kind of big band sound. This is nothing like that. This is modern for the time. Wasn't really as accessible and really didn't catch on at the time. It sort of developed this sort of look back and love of this record for years after it was originally released. Even when they were playing around there, that combination of the type of music, a little obtuse, a little free form, but not like out there jazz like an Ornette Coleman or Albert Ayler. Not that at all. Very accessible, but very beautiful, very organic, very kind of a mix of chamber jazz music. I think in the later 70s, a good jazz band that would maybe be influenced by this a little bit maybe, is Oregon, with Paul McCandless and Ralph Towner and so on, who originally on Vanguard. I should have pulled that album, but I didn't. That first Vanguard album I bought because of the cover, and I loved it. And then they recorded for ECM for a long time together as a unit, and then some separate solo and other projects. Beautiful records. So the 2 records from 1961 are combined on here with some extra tracks. And I think, I don't know if it was remixed or at the time, but this sounds really good. I think it's out of print, but try to find a copy if you can in this country. It's so great. ECM really needs to put this out. So thank you, Joe, for turning me on. One thing that was really interesting, and actually, when I was listening to this, track 3 on side 1 is a Carla Bley song called In the Morning Out There. In the Morning Out There. When I was listening to it, throughout like the middle to the end of that song, I kept thinking, oh my God, they're really kind of, you know how jazz artists will take a melody from one song and stick it into a solo of another song? There's a little repetitive thing going on here with the piano that's basically the riff the main theme riff of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. Da 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 da, da 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 da, and you hear it, you know, in and out of that third track on side one. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is recorded in 1961. A Love Supreme came out in 1964, 3 years later. So did John Coltrane hear this? I mean, come on. He must have heard this on Verve Records. And he, you know, everything is influence. And he might have sort of heard that riff, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, takes that riff, and that's the main riff in A Love Supreme. So check that out. If you have this record, listen to that. And then, of course, now you know you'll listen for it. But I wasn't even listening for it. I had no idea. And then I'm thinking, oh, John Coltrane. They took that riff to put it in their song. So, but a fabulous record on ECM Records. Staying with the woodwind and moody category, this record is pretty special. And again, in the 70s, when I was working in record stores, there was 2 records that the San Francisco, Marin, Northern California, you know, there's that ethereal hippie Marin County crowd went for when we played this in the store. And just one of this record, Paul Horn Inside, of course, flautist. The other record, which I don't have here, is Music for Zen Meditation by Tony Scott. We sold a shitload of that record near Golden Gate Park in San Francisco in the 70s. This was recorded in 1968 literally inside the Taj Mahal. John Archer was the recording engineer that, I think he brought a Nog or a tape recorder, and they literally showed up and walked around, and they heard, you know, the chanting within the halls. And they kind of just did this on their own, on the spur of the moment. Very cinema verite, audio verite style. And this is an amazing record. Of course, he would do several follow-ups to this, but what an amazing record this is. And of course, the liner notes tell the whole story inside the Taj Mahal. And it's really, really a wonderful, very spiritual, very ambient, very transcendental-like. So it's a gorgeous, gorgeous album by Paul Horn, recorded in 1968. And to their credit, Epic Records put it out, and it sold. That was a perfect time, right? The whole meditation thing was happening in the late 60s, and transcendental meditation and Indian music, and wonderful, wonderful record, definitely. Now, this record, this is The Rachels, and this is music for Egon Schiele. This was in the late 1996, yes. This was music performed for a stage piece on Egon Schiele, the artist. That's some of his work, Egon Schiele. And the Rachels are a sort of a neoclassical ambient group as well. In this case, led by Rachel Grimes, piano player. And this is such a beautiful, again, another meditative classical chamber record. I wanted to say edgy, but it's not edgy, but it's really wonderful. It's piano, viola, and cello. It's got Christian Frederickson on viola and Wendy Doyle on cello and Rachel Grimes on piano. It's a small press out of Chicago, very loose kind of cover like that's not an actual bound attached cover, but if you find this on compact disc or vinyl, it is such a beautiful record. So Rachel Grimes has some records. Some of it's more ambient and performance-based. I have about 4 or 5 of her records, different combination of musicians. But Rachel Grimes and company, music for Egon Schiele. A little neoclassical beauty fuel kumbaya thing. Now, you know who the first host for The Tonight Show was in 1956 or 57? The great comedian, actor, piano player, and a jazz fan is Steve Allen. Of course, Steve Allen would have The Tonight Show on his own show. And he did a performance, hooked up. One of the guests he had several times on the show was a great beat poet, Jack Kerouac. I'm a big fan of the whole, on the road and the beat poetry of Jack Kerouac, his time in San Francisco, obviously, and other things. So The the two of them did a live presentation for a few days. I think it was at Village Vanguard in New York, and it really didn't get great reception. But when Jack Kerouac was to do his first album of poetry readings, he brought in Steve Allen again a couple of years later, and they did this album. Now, this album was part of a Rhino Beat Poet box set that I got many years ago. It's way out of print. The originals of this go for a lot of money. All it is the wonderful piano playing of Steve Allen. He is really a good piano player. And Jack Kerouac doing readings, some of his poetry over that piano playing. And it really works. Jack has that New York accent. It almost seems like a yin-yang opposites, intersecting, fusing idioms in a way. And it's such a great record. Now, I understand, I saw somewhere, and I don't know where, so you need to Google it yourself. I'm not going to do the work for you. If you want this music, do the work. This is coming out as a reissue, and I would jump on it if you like beat poetry. Now, you can listen to it on YouTube first if you maybe, it's not that soothing, sleepy voice that's going to put you to sleep like ASMR stuff of Kerouac. But this is just like, poetry for the beat generation. But Steve Allen on his show at the time brought a lot of interesting guests. He was really forward thinking in terms of introducing his audience to, at the time, that Tonight Show, that weren't really hep to the hep cats in a way. So this is kind of a cool record too. Lastly, I want to close out, and I've done a little feature, so do a search in the search here at YouTube. I'll put a link below anyway. I did one on Ken Nordeen. I love out there kind of the convergence of word jazz in this case. That's Ken Nordeen. I don't have an original album of this. This is a somewhat new album, Word Jazz, featuring Ken Nordeen. Now, what's interesting about this reminded me, because when I was listening to this Jimmy Giuffre 3 album, especially the first side, so Word Jazz and Son of Word Jazz, this is a CD issue. It reminds me of that musically in the background. I first heard Ken Nordeen's Word Jazz on late night FM radio, KMPX and KSAN radio. They would mix it in late night with rock and roll, Long Grateful Dead and Quicksilver pieces and Paul Butterfield Blues Band East West. And they'd stick in these little vignettes from Word Jazz, which are almost like beat poetry. Ken Nordeen was the voice. If you've heard in the 60s and 70s and beyond, those great Levi commercials, there's a new man in town. There's a new guy in town. That's Ken Nordeen. He did so many voiceovers and narration, along with another guy named Paul Frees, who was a great voice in the 60s, who did all the voices on the Disneyland rides like the Haunted Mansion. But the background music for this was sort of this jazz, obtuse jazz of the Fred Katz group, playing everything from percussion to piano to wind instruments like flute and clarinet and things in the background. And Ken Nordeen wrote these really amazing obtuse stories and very beat poetry like, what time is it? What time is it? And I won't even describe it. You need to check this stuff out if you haven't before. There's CD sets you can get all the time. But ironically, also, the woodwinds on the background of these albums is Paul Horn. But on the vinyl side, this is a comp that came out in the 70s that you can see used in stores all the time. This is a 2-record set. What a bizarre picture that is of Ken Nordeen, man. So wicked. And Michael Kiskuna, this is on Blue Note Records, and of course, who would work for Blue Note. Also a great jazz archivist and producer and record man. Michael Kiskuna put this together with the liner notes. Anyway, this was just more of a kind of a relaxing, kind of obtuse. I've said obtuse 4 times, haven't I, already in this video. Love this stuff. And in the right mood, this stuff is very rewarding. So check this music out. And that Blemish album by David Sylvian, which is my favorite album of the last 25 years, maybe. Depends on the mood I'm in. Thank you for watching again. Thank you for everything. Massey loves you.